The United States has a new Secretary of Education. Betsy DeVos was sworn in this week. How will she reshape public education in the U.S.? Former Louisiana governor turned education activist Bobby JINDAL will tell us. And Pope Francis appears to be commenting on U.S. immigration policy this week, while the Amoris Laetitia and Order of Malta controversies continue in Rome. Vatican correspondent for the National Catholic Register, Edward PENTIN, will tell us what he's hearing on the ground. And finally, we'll get story-oriented with Newberry Award-winning children's author Jerry Spinelli. He'll reveal the source of his best stories and his latest book, The Warden's Daughter. The World Over begins right now.
Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. Governor Bobby JINDAL, Edward PENTIN, and Jerry Spinelli are all straight ahead. If you'd like to comment on tonight's show, you can tweet me at Raymond Arroyo. I'll be live tweeting throughout the show, or you can send me an email. We're at worldover@EWTN.com. Let's get started. Here's the brief news from the world over this week. Two more of President Trump's key cabinet nominees were sworn into office this week, but not without some drama. Alabama Senator Jeff Sessions was sworn in as U.S. Attorney General on Thursday. While debating his nomination, Democratic Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren was cut off for breaking a 100-year-old Senate rule. She disparaged her colleague, Senator Sessions, on the floor, which is a no-no. Warren was silenced for reading a 30-year-old letter by Coretta Scott King that maligned Sessions. Jeff Sessions was nonetheless confirmed as Attorney General on a near party-line vote. Following Sessions' swearing in, President Trump signed 3 executive orders on criminal justice, including one tackling the problem of criminal cartels, another aimed at reducing violent crime, and a third, a plan to stop crimes against law enforcement.
First, I'm directing Department of Justice and Homeland Security to undertake all necessary and lawful action to break the back of the criminal cartels that have spread across our nation and are destroying the blood of our youth and other people, many other people. It's a shame what's been happening to our great, truly great law enforcement officers. That's going to stop as of today.
And on Tuesday, billionaire businesswoman and philanthropist Betsy DeVos was sworn in as U.S. Education Secretary hours after she won confirmation in an historic tie-breaking vote. With the affirmative vote of Vice President Mike Pence, DeVos became the first cabinet nominee to be confirmed by a 51-50 vote. Republicans Susan Collins of Maine and Lisa Murkowski of Alaska joined the Democrats in voting against DeVos, citing concerns that her advocacy for charter schools went too far. Democrats said she was unfit to be Education Secretary because of her lack of public school experience. More on DeVos and all the latest from Washington in our next segment. And with the migration debate raging at fever pitch here in the U.S. and around the world, Pope Francis took a thinly veiled swipe at President Donald Trump's border policies this week. Speaking at his weekly general audience, the Pope repeated his appeal to the world to build bridges and not create walls. He added, quote, "A Christian would never say, 'You will pay for that.' Never." Francis has frequently invoked the bridge, not walls appeal, including following a visit to the U.S.-Mexico border last year. On that occasion, he was asked about then-candidate Trump's pledge to build a border wall. The Pope said that someone who thinks only of building walls and not building bridges is not a Christian. And the Pope and the President might not see eye to eye on every issue, but they will be seeing eye to eye this May. According to reports, President Trump is likely to visit Pope Francis when the president travels to Sicily for the G7 Economic Summit. There have been no announcements from either Rome or Washington about a potential meeting. However, a source from the Holy See told the Vatican Insider that such a meeting was likely. We'll keep you posted. And some disturbing news coming out of Australia. The Australian Royal Commission investigating sex abuse by Catholic clergy found that 7% of Catholic priests had been accused of some form of sexual abuse. Accused. The study included the years 1980 through 2015. Average age of victims, 10 for girls, 11 for boys. The commission interviewed church authorities and found that nearly 4,500 people said they'd been abused at over 1,000 Catholic institutions across Australia. Francis Sullivan, the head of the independent commission set up by the Australian bishops, said the findings demonstrated a massive failure by church officials.
A misguided determination by leaders at the time to put the interests of the church ahead of the most vulnerable, and a corruption of the gospel the church seeks to profess. As Catholics, we hang our heads in shame.
In Rome, police are on the hunt for the creators of posters critical of Pope Francis. They appeared throughout the city this past weekend. Hundreds of posters mysteriously popped up on the streets of Rome on Saturday. Beneath a stern-looking Pope Francis, the Pope is criticized for his actions against the Order of Malta, religious orders, and cardinals, particularly those who submitted that dubia, those questions to him. The poster concludes rhetorically, asking Pope Francis, "But where is your mercy?" No group or individual has taken credit for the posters, but they appeared on the same day that Francis appointed his own special delegate to run the Knights of Malta, a sovereign order. During Sunday Mass, Pope Francis made no direct reference to the posters, but he called on the faithful to stay away from polluting germs of selfishness, envy, and slander. More on these stories and more from Rome later in the show. And how about some positive news? We need something. For the first time, a remote Siberian village has a small church all their own thanks to the efforts of one man. Sosnovka resident Alexander Batyotkin built a chapel totally out of packed snow. The man worked on the chapel every day for 2 months, even as temperatures plunged to minus 22 degrees. He said he built the church so the villagers would have a place to pray. Sosnovka has no church or priest. It took 424 cubic feet of fresh snow to build the church. Batyotkin says the altar and the cross on the roof were the most difficult to construct. Residents hope that it will be replaced by a permanent chapel. For all of you snowed in by that nor'easter, be thankful you're not in Siberia. And the Will Wilder series continues. The sequel to my new Will Wilder book for young readers, Will Wilder, The Lost Staff of Wonders, hits bookstores on March 7th, but you can pre-order it now at Amazon.com, EWTNRC.com, Barnes & Noble, or your local independent store. You can also pre-order the audiobook version. I know a lot of you like to experience books that way. I recorded this one recently in New York. Here's a little preview.
Chapter 1, The Flying Demon. Few of the residents of Perilous Falls knew that their town's museum housed much more than relics and antiquities. Rising up like a mountain of spires and domes at the high end of Main Street, the museum could be seen from anywhere within the city limits. Most had no idea that a mysterious community lived within its walls, hidden from public view.
Now, if you pre-order the book or the audiobook, send me a receipt or confirmation of purchase. I'll send you a signed bookplate and a limited edition bookmark. Email me at raymond@raymondarroyo.com for your signed bookplate and bookmark. Write Will Wilder 2 in the subject line, and be sure to include your address. We'll get those right out to you. All the info is at raymondarroyo.com, and I'll be announcing tour dates soon. I want to see you all in person. When we return, we'll talk education policy and the newly appointed Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos. Former Louisiana Governor Bobby JINDAL implemented many of the education reforms the Trump administration is proposing nationally. Do they work? We'll find out when The World Over continues. Stay right there.
To everyone on this team, my challenge to you is simple. Think big, be bold, and act to serve students. And I will promise you this. Together, we will find new ways in which we can positively transform education.
Welcome back to The World Over. That was Education Secretary Betsy DeVos on her first day looking to mend fences with educators, parents, and activists across the country following a bruising confirmation process. How will she reshape education in the United States? For some answers, we turn to a man who has implemented many of President Trump's education initiatives over his 2 terms as governor of Louisiana. My next guest champions school choice, opportunity scholarships, and the adoption of charter schools, not to mention teacher tenure reform. What were the results? Here with his take is former Louisiana governor and presidential candidate Bobby JINDAL. Thank you for joining us from Baton Rouge.
Raymond, thank you for having me. It's great to be back on the air with you.
Great to have you. I want to start with Betsy DeVos, the new education secretary. She, like you, has devoted herself to school choice. The heart of the Trump plan seems to be this $20 billion block grant to the states to fund school vouchers. Now, some say this is only going to increase federal intrusion into local private schools. What have you seen on the local level, Governor JINDAL?
Well, look, I think it's very important to make the dollars portable, to have the dollars follow the students instead of making the students follow the dollars. But Raymond, you raise a very important point. Even as we make these dollars follow the students, we don't want the same federal bureaucracy to come into the private schools that's already there in the public schools. Here in Louisiana, we have one of the country's most ambitious school choice programs. Like you mentioned, we've got tax rebate programs, we've got charter schools, we've got a scholarship program, we've got over 100,000 kids in some form of choice. We've done that while still preserving the autonomy and the flexibility in those private schools that makes them so special. The worst thing you could do is kill off their autonomy and replicate that bureaucracy. So I think you can have both, but you're right to be concerned about that. It's important to maintain that balance.
Governor JINDAL, 93% of New Orleans students attend charter schools. What has been the impact, and is this a threat to the public schools? The teachers' unions insist that it is.
Well, I mean, look, the teachers' unions are more worried about protecting a failing system than actually being worried about the students that are trapped in that system. Soon in New Orleans, it's going to be 100% of those kids will be in charter schools in 5 years. Over 60% of those kids were going to failing schools. Now it's less than 10%. We've seen record growth in retention rates, graduation rates, record growth in AP scores, ACT scores. What we have seen is that kids that were formerly trapped in failing public schools now have a real chance to get a great education. Yeah. To me, that's what's most important. It's not about the system. It's not about the adults in the system. It's about the kids in the system. New Orleans is a great example of what happens when you have competition, when you have choice, when you trust parents to make decisions for their own kids.
I want to talk about the voucher record. The National Bureau of Economic Research did a study. They contend that your Louisiana Scholarship Program vouchers reduced academic achievement. They claim attendance at private schools actually lowered math, reading, science, and social studies scores. Why will this work nationally?
Well, first of all, that's simply not true. If you actually compare to what the kids were doing in their public schools before they came to those private schools, clearly they're getting more opportunities to learn, whether it's reading, math. The data shows the longer they've been in these private school programs, the better they do over time. And they've continued to show rapid gains. But here's the most important thing. Look, you know, both sides can throw data at each other. It really comes down to the best form of accountability is parental choice. If the parents aren't happy, they'll move their kids to a different school. Over 90% of the parents in the school choice in this voucher program, the scholarship program, are pleased with the results. And look, we can throw numbers back and forth, but the most powerful thing is when you listen to the moms. And a lot of times these are single moms. I'll share with you just one example. I remember meeting a mom in New Orleans East. Her daughter was going to a parochial school. She wasn't even Catholic, but she loved the values, she loved the uniform, she loved the academic rigor. This woman, this mom told me her story. She said, look, I was a single mom on welfare. I had my daughter when I was a teenager. I got pregnant when I was a teenager. Her own mom got pregnant when she was a teenager and had her at a young age. She wanted to break those cycles. She wanted her child, she wanted her daughter to have a chance to get a better education, to have more opportunities than she had. She was so grateful for this voucher, this scholarship program, so grateful her daughter was going to a parochial school. Ultimately, it's the ultimate form of accountability is parental choice. If that mom's not happy with the education her daughter's getting, she'll change schools. And this is what she told me. This was the first time her daughter was thinking about staying in school beyond high school. It was the first time her daughter was bringing home homework, first time she was safe in school, first time she was wearing a uniform. She had paper, pencils, things that we take for granted in a classroom. This was the first time her daughter had those things. The ultimate form of accountability is parental choice. Let's trust those moms.
Are you at all concerned that this plan on a national level, if you spread federal dollars through the states and in the form of vouchers, that these students will overwhelm the parochial and the private schools and ruin the things that they're known for and indeed celebrated for today?
Well, look, a couple of things. One, it's not, all these schools still have the choice about whether they want to participate or not. Nobody's making them participate. Many do, but others decide not to. So it's certainly up to those schools, and many of that see as part of their ministry, their mission, and they want to serve these students. It's good for those students, it's good for these schools, but it's still up to those schools to make that decision. Secondly, we're not sitting here saying that every child should go to a private school or every child should go to a charter school. What we're saying is that every child learns differently. We've got this top-down, one-size-fits-all approach in America. What we're saying is replace that with a bottom-up approach. Some kids will do better in a dual enrollment program. Some kids will do better in a charter school. Some kids will do better in a college prep program. The point is, let the parents decide. Every child learns differently. And then finally, third, even in Louisiana, with this ambitious school choice program, over 100,000 kids participating in choice, we still have the vast majority of our kids in public schools. The studies have shown, though, that choice and competition improve the public schools. So it's good for the kids that get to go to private schools, but it's also good for the kids that are in the public schools. Those schools get better as well. What you also see is the private schools are great at adding new capacity. So one of the things we're seeing in Louisiana is we have course choice. It's not just school choice, but it's course choice where kids can start their day in a public school and then go get instruction, whether it's in math or science or in a foreign language, from a different provider. So it's not all or nothing. It can be mix and match. And so at the end of the day, what we're seeing is the private sector is adaptable. They're creating new capacity. They're meeting the needs of these students. At the end of the day, whether that child's at a great public school or a parochial school or a private school, the important thing is that every child has a chance to get a great education.
Governor JINDAL, what do you make of this plan? Congressman Tom Massey has submitted a bill that would eliminate the Department of Education by 2018. A good idea?
Well, you know, I actually put out a detailed plan. You mentioned I was recently a candidate for president.
That's right.
I put out a pretty detailed plan about what I would do with the Federal Department of Education. It would still maintain the department, but it would dramatically reduce its size, its scope, its responsibilities, its funding. I'm, as a governor, a former governor, as somebody who's been active at both the state and the federal level, I believe that the best governance, the governance that's closest to the people. So instead of all these decisions being made in D.C., let the decisions be made at the local and state level, return the funding, return the decision-making authority to the local and state levels. There are still things that the Federal Department of Education can and should do. For example, true civil rights enforcement, not these bogus political cases, but true civil rights enforcement. Secondly, providing real tools, real opportunities for parents to measure how their kids are doing. And that doesn't mean Common Core, certainly. I'm opposed to that. But there are things that the Federal Department of Education can do to help facilitate so that parents can compare how their kids are learning, compare different tests. So there are certain limited roles for the Federal Department of Education, but I think today it's trying to do too much and trying to be all things to all people. In our example, in our state, for example, the Obama administration used the Federal Department of Justice to try to stop our school choice program. And you had the federal government try to come in and tell moms that the federal government knew better than them how their children should be educated. So I think there is a role for the Federal Department of Education, but I think it's far too big, far too bureaucratic. Common Core is a great example of that. Federal government shouldn't be making local curriculum decisions, and they shouldn't certainly be coming in and telling moms that the D.C. bureaucrats know better than them.
Governor JINDAL, final question. You know Betsy DeVos. You worked with her on the local level to move some of your initiatives and some of these groundbreaking education reforms years ago. The critique of her is that she has no experience running anything. She's never worked or been near public schools. You would say what? And what do you expect from her?
Look, the opposition, now that the theatrics are over, now that all the speeches on the Senate floor are over, let's be very clear what this is about. We don't have equality of opportunity in education in America. If you're in the middle class, if you're in the upper class, you do have great educational choices for your kids. All those people criticizing Betsy DeVos, all those Democratic senators, I guarantee you their children, their grandchildren are going to great schools. They live in neighborhoods with great public schools, or they can afford to send their kids to great private schools. But if you're in the lower income, if you don't make that much money, you don't have great opportunities today. Betsy DeVos has spent much of her life. She has committed her own personal resources, her own time, fighting to give every child in America a great chance at a great education. I'm excited for the change that's coming to the Federal Department of Education. I applaud President Trump for having the courage to take on the status quo. I applaud Betsy DeVos for dedicating her life to this. The reality is we've done the same thing over and over, and America now ranks about 16th, depending on the different international rankings you look at. We rank 16th in educational outcomes in the world. We can do better than that. Einstein said the definition of insanity was doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. That's what we've done in education. Betsy DeVos will bring change. She will fight to make sure that every student gets a great education. The reason the teacher unions, those Democratic senators, were so opposed to her, they know they've been hypocrites. They've been defending the failed system, not the students.
I've only got a minute here. Maybe this is unfair to ask you in my final seconds, but the Obamacare repeal and replace, should that be simultaneous? You know more about health care than most people I've come across, even here in D.C. What form should that replacement look like, Governor Jindal?
Couple of things. I think they need to do it very quickly. No more of these delays. They've had years now. The Republicans have had years to come up with their plans. There's no reason for them to continue to delay this. I think that the replacement plan should have three criteria. Number one, we don't need to increase the Obamacare. We don't need to maintain the higher levels of taxes and spending. We can't afford the federal government we've got today. We don't need to continue to grow it. Secondly, we don't need to encourage more dependence on the federal government. One of the things Obamacare did was it made people newly dependent on the federal government even when they already had private insurance. Third, we don't need the federal government micromanaging our health care, telling us what kind of benefits we get, not telling us what kind of insurance we can buy. We need choice and competition in the health insurance marketplace. I put out a very detailed plan about how to do this. We need to make health care affordable. Obamacare did not do that. Any Republican replacement plan needs to avoid those three pitfalls. So, for example, let's get rid of the individual mandate. Let's get rid of the new taxes and spending. Let's not continue the Medicaid expansion. Instead, let's make private health care truly affordable for the American people.
Very good. Governor Jindal, thank you so much for the time. We'll check in with you again, and you can learn more about Governor Bobby Jindal's ideas on education policy and much more at America Next, americanext.org. Thank you again, Governor. When we return, Pope Francis comments on U.S. immigration policy while controversy continues to swirl over communion for divorced and remarried Catholics. The National Catholic Register's Edward PENTIN joins me from Rome. Next, The World Over continues in a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over. Similar to Washington, D.C. under Donald Trump, there is never a dull moment in Rome with Pope Francis occupying the chair of Peter. He weighed in this week on U.S. immigration policy. He spoke about rigid religious groups, and he issued a video message for the Super Bowl. To help us make sense of it all is the Vatican correspondent for the National Catholic Register, Edward PENTIN, who joins us from Rome. Edward, thanks for being with us.
Good to be with you, Raymond.
I want to start with that Wednesday audience address where the Pope seemingly took a shot at President Trump's immigration policy. He said, and this is the quote, "I appeal not to create walls, but to build bridges, to not respond to evil with evil, to defeat evil with good, the offense with forgiveness." A Christian would never say, "You will pay for that." Never. That is not a Christian gesture. An offense you overcome with forgiveness, to live in peace with everyone. Why do you think the Pope is getting so pointed and political, Edward, and how is it being received in Rome?
Well, this goes to the heart, Raymond, of the Pope's strong concern for immigration, of course, and that he's spoken about this before. We all remember, of course, I think when he came back from Mexico last year, he said pretty much the same thing. when asked about Donald Trump. And he said, you know, we need a person who wants to build walls and not build bridges is not a Christian.
Right.
And he basically repeated that this time, but made it even more specific by using the terms, obviously, that they know somebody else shouldn't pay for it.
Right.
So I think there's no doubt that who he's trying to address with this.
Mm-hmm. I want to move on to Amoris Laetitia, which continues, despite our best efforts, to crowd out other headlines. But this story just won't die, because every week it seems somebody else contributes to this ongoing international dialogue about just what the papal teaching means. This was, of course, Pope Francis's document on the family, and it continues to churn up controversy. Last week, the German Bishops' Conference issued guidelines on Amoris Laetitia, indicating that civilly divorced and remarried Catholics can receive communion on a case-by-case basis. Now, Cardinal Reinhard Marx says there was unanimity among the German bishops on this, but this seems to be at odds with what Cardinal Muller, who runs the Vatican's doctrinal office, is saying. What are you hearing, Edward?
Well, exactly that, Raymond. I mean, there's this division of opinion, and the German bishops, Cardinal Marx said, are unanimous. That's not quite true. I think there's certainly the majority of them are in support of that position, but not all of them. And of course, Cardinal Muller, who is German himself, head of the doctrinal congregation, is on a completely different page. But I spoke to Cardinal Marx briefly about this, and he said, you know, the line he thinks is very clear in Amoris Laetitia, and the line of the Pope in particular. So I think for him, it's all basically cut and dry. But as I say, there's a big mix of opinion, and that's of course why the dubia was issued by the 4 cardinals.
Yeah, and the dubia, which the Pope has yet to answer, those 5 questions posed by these cardinals about Amoris Laetitia. Before I move on from Germany, you did an interview this week with the Father Hans Langendorfer. Tell us who he is and why this is important, what you learned.
Yes, he's the General Secretary, Raymond, of the German Bishops' Conference, and he is sort of the sort of hidden mover and shaker behind the German bishops, as I understand from good sources in Germany, and that he really is the sort of brains behind all of these big decisions. What was interesting in his interview was that he basically was very rigid, if you like, and very strong on the issue of the church tax, and that must be paid, and if you don't pay it, you can't be active in the Catholic Church in Germany. But of course, he was very sort of loose on the Amoris Laetitia question, saying that discernment is the issue there. So there's, I think it shows very much the sort of the complete illogicality, I think many people feel, within the German bishops and the way they think.
Yeah. Speaking of German thinking, there was a story that Cardinal Walter Casper of Amoris Laetitia fame told Italian television this week that he believes intercommunion between Protestants and Catholics in mixed marriages is fine. He told them, in certain cases, I think yes, if they share the same faith in the Eucharist, this is presupposed, and if they are interiorly disposed, they can refer to their conscience to go to communion. And this, I think, is also the position of the current Pope. Edward Pentin, is it? And are individual consciences the new guides here?
Yes, I mean, it should be said here, Raymond, that of course there are some exceptions. There is some allowance of intercommunion already that was introduced under John Paul II. But in this case, he's talking about a much broader sense of practice and allowing mixed marriages, mixed couples to receive Holy Communion. So it's going along quite a far distance from what we have already. And of course, that's been criticized, widely criticized in the past. I think it is probably the Holy Father's position, because he's spoken very freely about the Eucharist in terms of trying to allow, you know, everybody. It's you know, he's trying to allow everyone to receive the Eucharist who he feels needs it, which of course is very benevolent, but of course it runs into problems with theologians and certainly sacramental theologians.
Yeah, I sense a slew of new dubias floating into the papal room there. The Pope spoke to male religious superiors in November, and the transcript was just made available. In it, he says, in fact, he decries what he calls restorationist orders that give rigidity. He said, when they tell me that there's a congregation that draws so many vocations, I must confess I worry. How is this being received in Rome?
Well, I mean, this is kind of, it's consistent, Raymond, with very much the Pope's line. It seems to be the case with Pope Francis that looking forward is the only way. Looking back, looking at tradition, looking at the way the Church has always done it is just not acceptable anymore. And so it's always looking forward, and especially when he talks about new orders and that they could be restorationists. Well, that, of course, is anathema to the Holy Father, who thinks that everything should be done looking forward and not back. So in a sense, there's not much surprise about this, but of course it has, of course, shocked some people as well.
He also, I mean, according to reports, derided Medjugorje and the alleged appearances of Our Lady there. He called her a postmistress, one who drops a new letter whenever she appears. This is sure to rankle a lot of people and upset many who had a conversion experience or a change of heart while visiting that particular locale.
Yes, but again, Raymond, this is not particularly new. He said this before. I think a couple of years ago he said pretty much the same words. And I think it's just reiterating that. I don't know, nobody knows quite how he feels about Medjugorje, but there is a commission, of course, that finished a couple of years ago, and we were just waiting for the Pope's pronouncement on that. So maybe it's coming soon.
There are also these very strange posters that popped up over the weekend in Rome, Edward, and we'll put them up on the screen. These were popping up everywhere, and it was a sort of grimacing picture of the Pope, and it read at the bottom of the poster, "Ah, Francis, you've taken over congregations, removed priests, decapitated the Order of Malta and the Franciscans of the Immaculate, ignored cardinals, but where is your mercy?" Who are the sources of these posters, Edward?
Well, this is a mystery. I mean, I heard today there is some rumours going around that it's a conservative group who are unhappy with the Pope, not traditionalists, and that they're from Rome. But I understand also the sort of sense in Rome, too, among Romans, is that they're not particularly happy with Francis. Of course, you can't generalise too much, but I do know from Romans I've spoken to that they're not very happy about the sort of immigration issue, and they think that he should be a bit more even-handed about that. But it's not clear who did this. But of course, it caused a lot of news here and around the world. It's the first time, I think, since the Papal States that this has happened. So clearly, there's a lot of unease developing around this pontificate, as I think many viewers will be aware already.
There was another story. It was on the cover of the New York Times this week. Actually, you were mentioned in the story. And it concerned Steve Bannon, who is a counselor to President Trump, and a meeting he had, I believe, in 2014 with Cardinal Burke. And the piece tried to somehow conflate Cardinal Burke's trying to get an answer from the Pope and clarification on Amoris Laetitia with Steve Bannon and Donald Trump's political agenda. Does Steve Bannon wield some unseen power at the Vatican, or am I missing something?
Well, I think he's quite influential in the White House, of course, but in the Vatican, I think that story was generally made up to fit a narrative. And of course, the New York Times always tends to look at things through a political lens. And I think they saw a potentially good story here of pitching Steve Bannon with sort of orthodox conservative forces in the Vatican. Of course, that was completely misconstrued. There wasn't that took place. I was there, and I remember Steve Bannon came as basically like a reporter for Breitbart, and he just did a series of interviews and met a few people, including myself. But he as far as, for example, Cardinal Burke was concerned, it was just an interview. It wasn't a set meeting or anything else like that. It was just a radio interview he did with Cardinal Burke. So I think it's been overdone, this story, to really fit the New York Times and the way they want to see the world and the Church.
Yeah, no, I spoke to some producers at another network, and they were trying to get me to comment on this. I'm like, guys, I don't see it. There's no smoking gun here. I don't see this properly sourced. I don't understand the story. Steve Bannon visited the Vatican. That's like me saying I visited a network, so I'm trying to take over the network. I mean, it was really stretching. But do you see coming to the head, if you will, of forces in Europe, in Rome, attempting to conflate Orthodox Catholics, concerned Catholics, with a political agenda and the Trump agenda and sort of write them all off as kind of lunatic fringe alt-right or whatever the operative word of the day is?
I think that is a general sense. I mean, there was, yes, I think that sort of tying it to the so-called far right and to try and sort of caricature that political side as being far right. I think that is a general attempt. But I should say though that Steve Bannon, when I met him, I think the church probably is quite happy that he's there in many ways, because he does stand up for a lot of the issues which the church considers very important. Of course, the immigration one is very debatable, but on the sort of pro-life issues, he seemed very much on side, and so I think in those cases, I think it's helpful for the church. But I don't think there's any sort of cabal or anything like that that's developing here. I think there's just some hope that things have changed now that President Trump is in the White House.
Very good. Edward Pentin, thank you for being here and for your insight. You can follow all of Edward Pentin's reportage for the National Catholic Register at ncregister.com. When we return, award-winning kids author Jerry Spinelli is here. He'll talk about his latest work, his creative process, and how to get your children hooked on books. We'll get story-ented when the world over continues. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over and our story-ented segment when we talk to some of the best authors anywhere. He's the best-selling author of over 36 novels for children and young readers, including the Newberry Award-winning Maniac McGee. He's here tonight to discuss the source of some of his best-loved stories, offer tips to getting your kids to read, and his latest book, The Warden's Daughter. Here's my interview with Jerry Spinelli. Jerry, you initially wrote for adults. You didn't intend to write for kids. Tell us how this happened.
I had written 4 books that nobody wanted over a period of about 15 years.
Wow.
Started in on book number 5, thanks to one of my kids who stole my lunch one day out of the refrigerator, and I started writing something about that at work that day. And to the extent that a non-published author can be audacious enough to imagine an audience, I imagined an audience of somebody like people like you and me reading it, because I thought, thinking back on the life of a 13-year-old kid, I thought it was funny and interesting, and I thought folks like us would find it interesting to go back and look at that. But when my agent went to sell it to publishers, they told her, well, this is about a kid. Adults won't read a kid's book. You're going to have to peddle this to the juvenile divisions, which is what she did, and that's where I landed, and I've been there ever since.
Wow. Where did that character come from? I remember Jason. I read that book. It was Space Station 7th grade.
That's right. Yes.
Why is that your favorite book?
I'd say it's my co-favorite.
Okay.
I guess because it's my first published. And when you consider that it came along 25 years, a quarter of a century after I decided I wanted to be a writer, that was pretty meaningful. So my first baby, my co-favorite, yes.
Yeah. What's your favorite?
Well, I'd say along with that, I'd name Maniac McGee.
Yeah, and we'll talk about him in a moment, because that's such a favorite, I know, to everyone watching, and certainly to this guy. Many of your books, so many of them, right down to your most recent, The Warden's Daughter, they really do touch on lived experience and really universal memories. How much of it do you rely on your own memories or those of your children?
I would say a lot, particularly myself.
Really?
That's what I do. People assume, considering the number of kids and grandkids that we have, 6 kids, 30 grandkids, that I must be using them for source material all the time.
Right.
But in fact, more often than not, it's myself. I remember things. I remember giving my first public talk, and somebody in the audience raised a hand and said, "How do you remember all this stuff?" And that was my first indication that apparently not everyone does. I thought it was common.
Right.
I thought we all carry this stuff around like an addict. But I don't always remember what I did or said, but I often remember my reactions to things. I remember how I felt about things.
Yeah.
And so I'm constantly mining my own memories.
Wow. I am amazed, I have to tell you. That was the thing. In fact, I made a note about it. How do you recall this? There, you know, when I read that you mine your own memories for so many of these characters, some of their reaction and the situations they find themselves in, I was thinking, I can't remember those. It is a rare gift.
Maybe it is, and for that I'm thankful. It's given me a career. I remember getting a letter from a kid in the 90s. He said, Jason is just like me.
Yeah.
How do you know what I think? And I wanted to tell the kid, and here it goes back to the question, kids don't change. Their haircuts change, their sneakers cost more, and so forth.
Yeah.
But a kid when I was growing up in the 50s and a kid today they still have the same feelings, the same situations. A kid is a kid. There's the eternal kid. That doesn't change. And so if I'm going back and mining myself at the same time, I'm mining us all, the eternal kid.
Right. Do you feel any obligation, because as I read your body of work, there are lessons of kindness, acceptance, perseverance, and I see a redemptive finish in so many of these books. Is that intentional? Do you feel an obligation to give children a sense of redemption for these characters and for those readers?
Absolutely. Let me say a couple things in that regard. First of all, my first priority is to tell a good story. Otherwise, I think I might wind up, if I'm too focused on the message and the moral, I'm going to wind up with a pamphlet.
Right.
Not a novel.
Not a story. Right.
I want it to be a story. I want a kid to put it down and say, that was a good story. Okay. But then along with the story and the characters, they drive me steer me toward a message. And in the most general terms, that message is yes. I got a master's degree at Johns Hopkins at the writing seminars, and our chairman said there are two kinds of literature, yes and no. And I've always liked that distinction. Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
So I decided right then and there, years before I would ever have a book published, that I was going to write yes stories. And to this day, I keep that in mind.
Does belief play any role in your stories? Your personal belief?
I'm sure it does. I'm not always tapping into it consciously. And here, what's resonating with me now is something that Madeleine L'Engle said. The story often knows more than the writer. And so, you know, it seems like the less I think, the faster I write, the better I get. And so I like to think that things are flowing through me all the time, that I'm not necessarily calculating.
Dean Koontz, whom I interviewed recently, he has that same approach. Dean says
that right?
He feels, you know, there's another hand guiding this.
Sure.
He's not always in control and doesn't want to be.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. That's the art of it. That's why it's an art, not a science. I've read a couple of his books,
In 1989, you make a pretty major decision in your life to write full-time. You quit your day job and you do this. There was a lot of hardship for a while there financially. How hard was that for your family? You had 6 children.
Yeah, it was scary. I was out of work only for about a year, and I was beginning to look at the one ads because I didn't think we were going to be able to make it.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what made you stick to it? I mean, you were already, I imagine, writing about this character, Jeffrey Lionel McGee, who would become Maniac McGee.
Yes, and that book was not setting the world on fire. But then you say, what happened?
Yeah, tell us what happened.
A phone call happened at midnight, and my wife and I are asleep. I hear the phone ringing in the hallway. I don't want to answer it. When's the last time you got good news at midnight over the phone? So I answered it, and there was somebody on the end of the line telling me that they were careful not to get the facts mixed up with the truth, which I recognized as a line from the beginning of Maniac McGee.
Right.
And it turns out that some folks in a hotel room in Chicago had cast a vote, and Maniac McGee was the winner. And so first thing I knew was that I didn't need to go back to work. My work now
was writing.
Once and forever was going to be writing.
And
yes.
you were a Newberry Honor winner.
Yeah, well, Newbery Medal winner is what they called it. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Tell me about that story, because it's a beautiful sort of fable about that engages racism. And the story of this boy alone, finding his way, being adopted, if you will, temporarily by various families. Where did this story find its germ?
It's hard to say. I wrote 80 pages of it, tossed them away, wrote 100 more, tossed them away, and really I couldn't zero in on it. I think I wanted to write about a kid who was a hero to other kids. And more than anything else, first, there was the memory of a song. Now, you're way too young to remember this. Late 50s, early 60s, Martha and the Vandellas, Dancing in the Street.
Right.
Well-known a song. That always affected me, the vision of that song suggests. Everyone, all kinds, all colors, all backgrounds, dancing together in the street. And I think I wanted to write a book that would deliver a vision like that. So I think that more than anything, and then deciding after those two strikes that to make Maniac, to focus it in on the black-white issue more than anything else. And once I began to focus in on it, I was visited by the Muse. I wasn't sure I believed in the Muse, speaking of belief. Didn't know I believed in the Muse until it visited me. One night I'm there not even thinking about it, because I had had the two flame outs, and I figured, well, okay, I'm going to turn my back on this book for a couple of days. And sometimes, as you know, that's when things happen.
Yeah, it starts crackling. You hear it in the bathtub, you hear it when you're walking the dog.
And what I heard in my ear one night was, they say Maniac McGee was born in a dump. I wasn't reaching for that sentence. I wasn't thinking about the book at all. Those words just popped from nowhere into my head. And I went on and wrote a couple of paragraphs, showed them to Eileen, and she said, that's it. And the book was on its way.
Amazing. You mentioned Eileen, your wife Eileen.
Yes.
Who, if the reports can be believed, was the inspiration for Stargirl, another one of your great books. Almost a messianic figure in some ways.
I like to think so. Thank you for using that word. I don't remember anyone using it before. But yes, in more ways than one.
Because she's beloved. She's a girl who's beloved at the beginning, and then rejected and cast aside by all those who supported her previously.
There's more than a little resemblance to the New Testament in that book, which, as far as I know, so far, after 17 years, only one writer, one fan letter writer
really
has noticed.
Well, now there's two of us. There's two of us. Why did you want to write that? Because that also has a mythic quality to it that it makes it seem, in my reading, more timeless, larger, more eternal in some way. Was that intentional?
Sure. I was almost saying something that humans, people, as a race and as exemplified by this particular character, are hopefully moving in a better direction. That she represents the best in us, and what we can be. That's how I look at it, and so I'm just kind of making my pitch there, and we'll see what happens.
And giving them to amazing young people who are so hungry, I think, for role models, for a way to figure this life we're in out. Now, Maniac McGee is set in a town called Two Mills.
Yes.
In some of the writing and reportage I've seen, this town is sort of based on your childhood, Norristown,
Yes.
where you grew up.
Yes.
Two Mills was the setting for Maniac McGee. It is also the setting of your newest book, The Warden's Daughter. Why did you return to Two Mills, and why did you call it Two Mills?
Because it's where I grow up, and as you know, what piece of advice to young aspiring writers is more common than write what you know?
Right.
So it just feels natural and comfortable for me to return to that setting.
Do you outline when you work?
No, I'm sloppier than that, less organized.
So you just start in from, I was born in a prison.
I didn't mean that literally, that I sat down and began writing what you have there. What I did do is sit down and start making notes, not outlines or things like that, or that organized, but just what the kids would call brainstorming. And sooner or later, you reach a point where you just don't feel like making notes anymore. It's time. It reaches a kind of critical mass sort of thing. Maybe something nuclear goes on here, and you just got to change phases and start the thing.
Let's talk. There's some story-oriented questions I ask every author that comes here. Your favorite children's book and why?
That would be When You Are Happy. You may not be familiar with it. I'll tell you who wrote it. The person I live with, Eileen Spinelli. And I consider it the world's most beautiful book. It hits my trifecta for text, illustration, and message. I challenge anybody to show me another book where so much humanity is packed into so few pages. It's a 32-page picture book, and it's beautiful, and I believe it should be in everyone's home in this country. And so that wins my vote, hands down.
What's your least favorite book?
I'm trying to think. I'm not coming up with it.
You're not coming. You see, the writers always have problems with the least favorite.
Yeah.
For me, it's the big monster pieces.
Give me time enough, and I'd come up with.
See, I'm not a James Joyce fan. I don't like James Joyce. I cannot read Joyce anymore. I just I find that torturous.
Yeah, I took a shot. Maybe that's my least favorite book, Finnegan's Wake.
I'm with you.
You're talking to somebody who actually read 30 pages of it.
Oh, well, you see, you got through more than me.
Finnegan's Wake, I dare you to get through a paragraph.
Right.
So I'm proud of those 30 pages.
You see? But we agree. I'm glad we agree on the least favorite. What is the story that helped you find your way and the lesson you derived from it?
Believe it or not, I think it was the first story that meant something to me, and that was my mother reading it to me, and that was Babar the Elephant.
Oh.
And of course, I didn't understand what it meant to me or how it may have affected me till many years later. It's the story that has a sad ending, of an elephant dying. But I kept asking my mother to keep reading it to me night after night. And then now I ask myself, why did I do that? I'm as sad as it was, and it made me cry every time. I must have been getting something out of it, and I finally figured it. What I was getting out of it was it was making me feel somehow. It was drawing a reaction out of me. It was touching my heart, and what I learned from it was the power of a story.
Where do you write and why?
I have written in many places. I have written, as one writer says, in the cracks. When you have a family like I did, a job, several part-time jobs, you learn to write in the cracks of time.
Right.
Now I'm happy to say that things have gone well enough that now my office, my desk is here, and I'm looking out, big picture window, and then a few yards of land and a lake. I mean, I see deer walk by, groundhogs, an eagle.
Life moving.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to parents who have children who are reluctant readers?
You can put in front of them a book that they can relate to. Take Silas Marner away. Go to the library, talk to the children's librarian, let them recommend something that your kid can relate to. A life of a character that in some way resembles your kid's life, and turn them loose.
Yeah, let their own interests drive them to the book, or attract them to the book.
Yeah.
If you could write anything else, what would it be?
Science fiction. The closest I came was Hokey Pokey, which is actually not science fiction, but yeah, I'm a science fiction fan, and often frustrated because I find too little of it that makes me happy. And someday I'd like to write a good one, yeah.
Final question. George Martin, who wrote The Game of Thrones, has a saying. He claims that all writers are either gardeners or architects. Which are you?
I suppose yeah, gardener.
Planting
Earthlings.
seeds and watching them grow.
Seeds, and I think of seeds and plants growing with ourselves, growing together in the same plot called Earth.
Final question on this book. What do you hope people take from it, and why did you write it?
Beyond the fact that Ellen Adams gave me the spine of a good story,
I'll say.
What I found there was an opportunity to tell the story of someone who is a quiet hero. They're all around us. We see them all the time. We interact with folks doing wonderful things that nobody knows about. They're getting no trophies.
Right.
They're getting no headlines. Nobody knows about it, but they're sacrificing themselves, and often as not, they're doing so on our behalf, and we don't even know it. And such a situation occurs with Cammie and her inmate housekeeper, Eloda Pupko.
No, it's a beautiful story, and thank you for sacrificing for all these years for so many. What an impact you've had. Thank you. Jerry Spinelli's latest novel, The Warden's Daughter, is available in bookstores everywhere and online. Well, that is all the time we have until next week. The show continues on Facebook and Twitter. Like me on Facebook. You can follow me on Twitter. The links are at RaymondArroyo.com, as is our Will Wilder bookmark giveaway. Be sure to tune in to next week's show with my very special guest, a fellow New Orleanian, Harry Connick Jr. will be here. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thanks for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo from Washington, D.C. Bye now.